Hello, and welcome to the 71st edition of the GreenWave podcast by SYNI International. I'm SYNI, your host, and today's pod is titled The World Cup's 3.7 million-Tonne Problem. The 2026 FIFA World Cup should be a celebration of football at planetary scale. 48 teams, 3 countries, 16 host cities, billions watching, millions moving. It will also arrive with an estimated carbon footprint of around 3.7 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent. That figure should make the sustainability officers put down their lanyards and the sponsors shift slightly in their luxury boxes, because the problem is sitting in plain view. The world's biggest sporting event has designed itself around movement, and movement is where the emissions are. Football has always loved the language of unity. It brings people together, it crosses borders, it creates shared memory. Fine, all true. But in 2026, that same romance comes with flight paths, airport transfers, hotel nights, broadcast logistics, team travel, fan zones, freight, food systems, and a North American tournament map that looks less like a low-carbon event plan and more like an aviation stress test with songs. The harder point is that FIFA already has climate targets. It wants to cut emissions by 50% by 2030 and reach net zero by 2040. Those are serious words. They put FIFA into the same uncomfortable room as governments, airlines, utilities, manufacturers, developers, and every other institution claiming to have a plan for carbon. Targets are easy to announce because they happen in the future. Tournament formats happen now. That is where the 2026 World Cup becomes more than a football story. It becomes a live case study in the gap between sustainability ambition and commercial design. And for us at SYNI International, that gap is where the serious work always sits. The main emissions problem for the 2026 World Cup comes from travel. Around 85% of the expected footprint is linked to transport, especially air travel. In rough terms, that means about 3.15 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent from moving people around, and about 0.55 million tonnes from everything else: operations, energy use, infrastructure, hospitality, and the tournament machinery around the matches. Stadium power can be cleaned, waste streams managed, temporary diesel cut back, procurement rules tightened, food menus adjusted, hotels can buy renewable electricity, host cities can run shuttle buses and badge them with smiling leaves. All useful, all real, all smaller than the travel problem. The 2026 tournament is being hosted by the United States, Canada, and Mexico. That gives FIFA vast stadium capacity, huge commercial pool, established sports infrastructure, and access to one of the world's most valuable consumer markets. It also gives the tournament continental distances. A fan can follow a team across cities that are separated by time zones, not neighbourhoods. Teams, staff, media, sponsors, and tournament officials will move across a geography where aviation becomes the default. A compact tournament can use rail, coaches, dense public transport, and shorter logistics routes. A spread-out tournament hands a bigger share of the emissions bill to aircraft. Once that happens, the climate plan moves from operational discipline into structural exposure. And aviation is a stubborn sector. It is capital-heavy, fuel-dependent, hard to electrify at long distance, and still only at the early stages of lower carbon fuel deployment. Sustainable aviation fuels can help, but supply is limited, costs are high, and the volumes needed for global travel are nowhere near where they need to be. So, when a mega event depends heavily on flying, the emissions are baked in before the first whistle. That is the uncomfortable commercial truth. You can't PR your way around physics. Someone should embroider that onto the next VIP hospitality scarf. FIFA's Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions are the easier part of the story. Scope 1 covers direct fuel use from things the organisation controls more closely. Scope 2 covers purchased electricity. Those can be reduced through cleaner power, energy efficiency, better building systems, lower carbon temporary power, and smarter operations. Scope 3 is the beast. Scope 3 covers indirect emissions. For a World Cup, that means fan travel, team travel, accommodation, supply chains, merchandise, broadcasting, freight, services, food, and all the activity attached to staging an event of this size. The tournament may happen inside stadiums, but its emissions happen across airports, roads, hotels, warehouses, restaurants, production lines, and national grids. That is why mega event climate accounting gets messy. Control is fragmented. Responsibility is blurry. The invoice always arrives. This is the same problem we see in other sectors. A company can clean its offices and still carry a dirty supply chain. A data center can buy renewable electricity and still sit inside a constrained grid with diesel backup and water stress. A fashion brand can announce circularity and still rely on manufacturing and logistics systems that grind out emissions upstream. The World Cup is the same argument, with prima donna players diving after phantom fouls. The event is temporary, but the footprint is real. The emissions do not care that the tournament lasts a few weeks. Carbon accounting does not hand out sentiment discounts for dramatic extra time winners. And the tournament is growing together with the global popularity of football. The move from 32 teams to 48 teams expands the sporting product, the broadcast inventory, the sponsorship value, and the market reach. It also expands logistics. More teams equal more travel, more base camps, more matches, more fans moving between host cities, and more operating complexity. For FIFA, that growth has a strong commercial logic. More countries involved means broader fan engagement, more broadcast value, deeper sponsor reach, and a bigger political footprint inside global football. From a revenue standpoint, expansion is the end goal. From a climate standpoint, expansion raises the bar for proof. The problem is that climate credibility is no longer measured by the beauty of the pledge. It is measured by the design choices that sit behind it. It's all about tournament geography, match scheduling, host city clustering, team base allocation, ticketing incentives, fan transport options, procurement contracts, offset quality, and post-event reporting. If the format raises emissions, the sustainability strategy must work harder. That means fewer vague claims and more hard accounting. The central question for FIFA is simple. Can it reduce emissions in the tournament system, or will it mainly compensate for emissions after the fact? Offsets sit right in the middle of that debate. In theory, offsets have a role. Some emissions cannot be removed quickly, especially in sectors like aviation. A credible offset portfolio can direct money into verified projects that reduce or remove emissions elsewhere. That can include reforestation, avoided deforestation, renewable energy, methane capture, biochar, direct air capture, or other carbon removal methods. Yet, GreenWave listeners know offset quality varies. Additionality can be hard to prove. Permanence is a problem for nature-based projects. Leakage can eat away at the claimed benefit. Verification can be uneven. And buyers sometimes talk as if purchasing an offset unit has physically removed the emissions from the flight that created them. It has not. An offset is merely an accounting instrument tied to a claimed climate benefit somewhere else. It is only as credible as the project, the standard, the monitoring, the permanence, and the honesty of the claim. When it comes to sport, football is a trust business. Fans accept commercialization up to a point because the emotional product is strong. They will tolerate sponsors, VIP tiers, media packages, branded zones, dynamic pricing, and the rest of the modern sports circus. They get less patient when the same institutions ask for moral credit while the carbon bill climbs. Football cannot keep asking for the halo of sustainability while building tournament models that depend on maximum movement. There is a limit to how much green paint you can put on an airport lounge. The best way to understand the 2026 footprint is to separate operational control from system design. Operational control asks whether stadiums use clean electricity, whether waste is reduced, if food systems are better managed, does temporary power avoid diesel, if materials are reused, is water use sensible, do procurement rules have teeth? System design asks where the tournament is held, how far people must travel, how match schedules are clustered, how fan movement is shaped, whether lower carbon travel is practical, if teams are bounced across a continent, and does the business model reward mobility without accounting for its cost? The 2026 World Cup can make progress on the first category. The second category is much harder because it sits inside the tournament's commercial architecture. That is where this becomes relevant beyond football. Every major institution now faces the same pressure. Growth plans must survive carbon scrutiny. Expansion carries an emissions cost. The bigger the platform, the harder the accounting. And when the emissions sit outside direct operations, boards tend to reach for softer language. Investors, sponsors, insurers, cities, and regulators are getting better at spotting that move. Host cities also have their own stakes. A World Cup can bring tourism, global visibility, infrastructure upgrades, commercial activity, and civic pride. It can also bring congestion, public cost, heat risk, security burdens, waste, and a temporary spike in resource demand. For city governments, sustainability is a delivery problem. Transport networks must work. Hotels need capacity. Other pressing issues are energy management, public safety funding, and waste system staffing. Locals need to live through the spectacle without feeling like extras in someone else's commercial. The climate side adds another layer. If a host city claims the event supports its green agenda, it must show what changed after the tournament leaves. Better public transport, cleaner power, upgraded buildings, resilient venues, reduced diesel dependence, improved waste systems, and reusable infrastructure can all create a legacy worth having. Developers should watch this closely. The same public scrutiny facing FIFA now hits energy projects, real estate, data centres, industrial parks, airports, ports, and large tourism assets. Carbon claims are moving from marketing into due diligence. Lenders, of course, focus on the numbers. City budgets demand resilience. Communities crave local benefit. Regulators will always prioritise reporting. The easy slogans are running out of road. That shift is good for serious operators. It penalises the lazy claim and rewards the buildable plan. It forces promoters to show actual assets, energy sources, transport links, delivery routes, capex, emissions baselines, and post-project value. The World Cup is a useful mirror because it exposes the oldest problem in sustainability. Institutions love to control the visible parts and outsource the ugly parts to the wider system. For example, stadiums are visible, but flights are dispersed. Recycling bins are visible, but supply chains are boring. Solar panels are visible, while aviation fuel is chemistry and procurement and cost. That visibility problem distorts public debate. People remember the green-looking parts because they photograph well. For FIFA, the pathway to credibility starts with full pre-offset reporting. The public needs to see the gross emissions number before any compensation is applied. That is basic accounting hygiene. If an event emits 3.7 million tonnes and then buys offsets, the original footprint should stay visible. Then comes the harder part, source reduction. FIFA and the host organisers can cluster matches to reduce unnecessary travel. They can design ticketing packages that reward fans for staying within regional groups, coordinate rail and coach options where feasible, and require lower carbon logistics from suppliers. Other deliverables include pushing host cities toward clean electricity, cutting temporary diesel use and using existing stadiums, and avoid new concrete where possible. Some of that is possible now. Some depends on transport systems and fuel markets that FIFA does not control. But partial control is not no control. A tournament organiser with FIFA's market power can and should shape behaviour. It can set procurement conditions and formats. Other options include pressuring host cities, structure match schedules with carbon in mind, and publish emissions by category. Another good idea is to refuse weak offsets. FIFA can make sponsors live inside the same reporting logic they happily applaud from the hospitality suite. The offset debate also needs a cleaner hierarchy. First, reduce what can be reduced. Second, replace high-carbon energy and materials where possible. Third, redesign the system to avoid unnecessary movement. Fourth, use high-quality offsets or removals for the residual emissions that remain. For mega events, travel will remain the hardest piece. The Paris Olympics showed a version of the same issue. Even when organisers cut construction emissions by using existing or temporary venues, visitor travel still carried a large share of the footprint. The Super Bowl tells a smaller but similar story in the American context. Short event, huge fan movement, large travel emissions, offset purchases used to support climate claims. Sport keeps finding the same wall. The venue can get cleaner faster than the journey to the venue. That should push event organisers toward regional thinking. Future tournaments need to treat geography as a climate variable, not a decorative map. Dense host clusters reduce travel. Existing infrastructure reduces embodied carbon. Good rail changes the fan equation. Clean grids reduce operations. Reusable venues beat new monuments. Local accommodation planning lowers chaos. None of this sounds glamorous. That is usually how you know it might work. The football industry also needs to be honest about heat. By 2026, climate risk is not theoretical for football. Hotter summers affect players, fans, workers, pitches, training schedules, medical planning, insurance, and broadcast quality. North American host cities include places where heat can turn match-day operations into a serious health issue. Cooling demand rises. Water stress becomes harder to ignore. Storm risks complicate logistics. So the World Cup is dealing with both sides of the climate ledger. It creates emissions and it is exposed to climate impacts. That is the loop every sector now faces. Energy systems are the obvious example. Fossil fuel dependence drives emissions, then climate impacts damage infrastructure and raise demand for cooling, grid resilience, storage, and emergency response. The same feedback is arriving in sport, tourism, agriculture, insurance, logistics, and urban planning. There is another reason this podcast episode is recommended for sustainable finance. Carbon claims are becoming part of reputational, legal, and sponsor risk. A brand that spends heavily to attach itself to a global event wants public goodwill. If the event's climate story looks weak, the sponsor inherits some of the smell. No one will buy naming rights to a bonfire and then ask for an ESG award. Sponsors need to start asking better questions. What are the gross emissions? What share comes from travel? How are offsets selected? Who verifies them? Are reductions measured before compensation? What happens in host cities after the tournament? Is the climate plan audited? Are suppliers bound by contract? Are fan emissions included or politely escorted out of the room? Those questions will not kill mega events. They will change the cost of hosting them. And that is where the commercial implication becomes even more interesting. climate performance should be a bidding factor. Host countries with existing stadiums, clean grids, dense transport, strong rail, and credible reporting systems should have an advantage. Countries proposing new mega construction, long travel distances, weak public transport, and vague offset plans should face a higher bar. FIFA can choose to make that real, or it can keep treating sustainability as a report attached to a tournament after the core decisions have already been made based purely on bank. The 2026 World Cup is far too close now for deep structural change. Plus, the Trump climate denial factor is already in play to the detriment of the US. The fixtures, host cities, stadiums, travel patterns, and commercial architecture are largely set. The best immediate gains will come from operational discipline, cleaner power, smarter logistics, better scheduling within the existing format, serious supplier rules, public transport coordination, and clear accounting. The bigger lesson applies to the tournaments after 2026. If FIFA wants net zero by 2040, the tournament model must change well before 2040. Waiting until the late 2030s would be absurd. Aviation fuel transitions will not magically arrive in match-ready quantities. Net zero planning should shape tournament design at the bidding stage. Host selection, venue clustering, infrastructure reuse, travel corridors, fan mobility, and supplier systems need to be assessed before the commercial machine locks in. That is the point. Carbon cannot remain an afterthought once the event has already been designed for maximum reach. The 3.7 million-tonne figure is useful because it strips away the fog. It gives us scale. It tells us this is not a few light switches and some compostable forks. It is a full system footprint dominated by mobility. And that makes the World Cup a clean test of climate honesty. If FIFA reports clearly, reduces where it can, explains what it cannot reduce, uses offsets carefully, and changes future tournament design, it can move the industry. Football has the audience, the money, and the political reach. It can drag parts of the sports economy into better practice if it chooses to use its power that way. If it leans mostly on compensation and soft messaging, the credibility gap will widen. Fans may still watch, sponsors may still pay, hosts may still bid, but the climate claim will sound thinner every year. Carbon credits, in its recent analysis, put the 2026 problem in the right frame. The expected footprint is around 3.7 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent, and the dominant source is travel. That is the number to watch when FIFA talks about climate leadership. For SYNI International, the lesson is wider than football. Any organisation making a sustainability claim should be judged by the system it builds, the emissions it counts, and the costs it pushes elsewhere. Energy developers, grid planners, and industrial users know this. Serious project finance investors also know it. The glossy version of sustainability is losing ground. The serious version is about design, capital, physics, contracts, infrastructure, and measurement. Less romance, more wiring. Annoying for the slogan writers, excellent for the grown-ups. Hopefully, the 2026 World Cup will give us great football. It will also give us a carbon case study with global visibility. The question for FIFA is whether that visibility becomes pressure for better tournament design, or another round of climate language wrapped around the same old operating model. Football likes to say the world is watching. This time, the emissions accountants are watching too. Well, that's a wrap on our 75th GreenWave podcast episode. Thank you again for spending your time with us. If this episode helped sharpen the way you think about sport, travel, sustainability, and the real carbon cost of global events, follow the GreenWave podcast on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Podbean, Spotify, iHeart, Podchaser, Boomplay, and Player FM. Share the episode with colleagues, friends, partners, and the sustainability people in your network who still think a reusable cup can carry a 3.7 million tonne conversation. Leave us a review too. It helps more than you might think. You can also follow SYNI International on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, and visit us at synergy-international.net. Until next time, keep riding the green wave of sustainability.